Walk into any Western pharmacy and spend 5 minutes in the digestive health aisle. Count the products, probiotic supplements in a dozen different strains and billion-count doses. Prebiotic fiber powders, digestive enzymes in capsule form, gut repair protocols, leaky gut supplements, IBS management products. The aisle is enormous because the problem is enormous. Digestive complaints, chronic bloating, irregular bowel function, IBS, constipation, the general sense that your gut is simply not doing what it is supposed to do, affect a staggering proportion of the Western adult population. The supplement industry exists to sell solutions to a problem that keeps growing regardless of the solutions being sold. Now walk through Japan. Not metaphorically, but actually think about what the data shows. Inflammatory bowel disease rates in Japan, while increasing as the country has westernized its diet, remain significantly lower than in Western populations. The rates of the specific type of functional gut disorder that plagues Western adults, the bloating, cramping, irregular function, food sensitivity cascade that has become almost a defining condition of modern Western life, are meaningfully different. Not absent, not zero, Japan has gut problems. The country has historically high H. pylori infection rates that have driven significant investment in gastric medicine. Colorectal cancer is not rare there. So let me be direct. This video is not claiming Japan has solved digestion. What it is claiming, with evidence behind it, is that the chronic functional gut disorders that define Western digestive life, the conditions that fill supplement aisles and gastroenterology waiting rooms, are less prevalent in Japan, and that the reasons behind that difference are specific, understood, and replicable without buying anything from the supplement aisle. The irony at the center of this entire conversation is precise and worth stating plainly before we go further. The Western supplement industry is selling solutions to a problem that Western eating patterns created. Probiotic supplements exist because the Western diet destroyed the gut microbiome that regulates digestion. Digestive enzyme supplements exist because the Western diet reduced the body's own enzyme production through years of processed food inputs. Leaky gut repair protocols exist because the Western diet created the inflammation that damaged the gut lining in the first place. Japan never needed the supplement aisle because Japan never created the problem the supplement aisle is designed to address. Today I will walk you through 7 specific reasons why the ordinary, unremarkable daily life of a traditional Japanese person produces a gut that functions consistently and without drama. 7 reasons that are not about any single food or any single supplement, but about a system of daily habits that collectively keep the gut in the conditions it needs to work. Stay with me until number 4, because that is the finding that most profoundly explains the gap between Japanese and Western gut health, and it is not what most gut health content is talking about. At the very end, I will give you the practical gut reset, 5 changes you can start tonight that target the actual mechanisms rather than the symptoms. Let us get into it. Number 1. Japan does not eat fermented food occasionally as a health practice when it remembers to. It eats fermented food at every meal, as a default, without any thought given to the health implications of doing so. This distinction is not a minor detail about frequency, it is the entire difference between a supplement strategy and a lifestyle, and it explains why the research on fermented food and gut health shows such divergent results between studies of Japanese populations and studies of Western supplement users. When Western gut health research studies probiotic supplements, it typically finds modest, inconsistent benefits that vary significantly across individuals. Some people respond well, many show minimal change. The supplement intervention works for some and does nothing for others. This inconsistency has frustrated researchers and disappointed supplement consumers for decades. But when researchers study populations that consume fermented food consistently, daily, across their entire lives, the picture is different. The gut microbiome of someone who has been eating miso soup for breakfast every day for 70 years looks different from the gut microbiome of someone who has been taking a probiotic capsule for 3 months. Not marginally different, meaningfully different in diversity, stability, and functional capacity. The mechanism behind this difference is the distinction between seeding and maintaining. A probiotic supplement delivers bacteria. Whether those bacteria take up residence in the gut and multiply depends entirely on whether the environment is hospitable to them, and an environment that has been built on ultra-processed food, low fiber, and chronic inflammation is often not hospitable enough for supplement bacteria to survive transit and establish colonies. a Japanese gut that has been fed fermented food, diverse fiber, and minimal inflammatory inputs since childhood, has an environment that is already structured to support and maintain beneficial bacterial populations. The fermented food delivers bacteria into a home that was built for them. The supplement delivers bacteria into an environment that may or may not be able to accommodate them. Japan's fermented food stack is also far more diverse than the 1 or 2 bacterial strains delivered by a typical probiotic capsule. Miso alone contains dozens of bacterial and fungal species depending on the fermentation period and method. Tsukemono pickled vegetables contain a different microbial profile from miso. Natto contains Bacillus subtilis var. Natto, a bacterial strain with properties almost entirely absent from standard probiotic supplements. Shoyu and mirin add further fermented diversity. Each day of traditional Japanese eating adds multiple different fermented inputs to a microbiome that has been established and maintained across decades. There is a diversity point the supplement comparison misses entirely. Japanese fermented food across a day delivers dozens of different bacterial strains across miso, tsukemono, shoyu, and natto. A probiotic capsule delivers 2 or 3 at most. Here is the shift. The supplement aisle is solving the wrong problem. The problem is not insufficient probiotic dose. The problem is insufficient fermented food consistency. 3 capsules of Lactobacillus acidophilus cannot replicate what decades of daily miso soup have built. Add fermented food to every meal, every day, before you spend another $1 on supplements. Number 2. Japan eats an extraordinary diversity of plant-based fiber, and fiber diversity is the primary driver of microbiome diversity in a way that most gut health conversations underemphasize. The research on this is specific enough to quantify. The Japanese diet traditionally incorporates somewhere between 40 and 50 different plant species per week, including seaweeds, root vegetables, fermented vegetables, legumes, mushrooms, and leafy greens that are almost entirely absent from the Western dietary vocabulary. The average Western adult eats somewhere between 15 and 20 different plant foods per week, and a significant proportion of those are from a small number of highly repeated categories: salad mix, broccoli, carrots, potatoes, and whatever processed food happens to contain plant derivatives. Why does plant diversity matter specifically to gut health? Because different bacterial species in the gut eat different types of fiber, and a monoculture diet produces a monoculture microbiome. Bacteroid species thrive on certain plant polysaccharides. Bifidobacterium populations are maintained by inulin-type fructans found in specific vegetables. The bacterial species that produce butyrate, a short-chain fatty acid that is the primary energy source for the cells lining the colon and one of the most important compounds for gut wall integrity, require fermentable fiber from specific plant sources to produce it. Seaweed deserves specific attention because it is essentially absent from Western diets while being a regular daily component of Japanese eating. Seaweed contains polysaccharides, including laminarin, fucoidin, and alginate, that are fermented by specific gut bacterial species in ways that produce beneficial metabolites almost entirely unavailable to people who eat no seaweed. Research on the gut microbiomes of Japanese coastal populations has found bacterial species specifically adapted to metabolizing seaweed polysaccharides, adaptations so specific that they appear to have been established across generations of consistent seaweed consumption. The Japanese gut has literally evolved to extract nutrition from seaweed in ways that Western guts have not, because the consistency and duration of that dietary input selected for the bacteria that could process it. Burdock root, called gobo, is another specifically relevant Japanese vegetable. It is one of the highest prebiotic fiber foods commonly available, containing inulin in concentrations that make it one of the most effective gut microbiome feeds available from whole food. Daikon contains digestive enzymes that support the breakdown of fats and proteins alongside its fiber content. Shiitake mushrooms contain beta-glucan fiber with documented immune-modulating effects mediated through the gut. Each of these foods is doing something specific for the gut ecosystem, not just providing generic fiber. Research found people eating 30 or more plant species weekly had significantly more diverse microbiomes than those eating fewer than 10, regardless of other factors. Japan's traditional diet exceeds 30 as a baseline without anyone counting. Here is the shift. Count the plant species you eat in a typical week. Not servings, species. If the number is below 25, your microbiome is receiving a narrow enough input that its diversity is likely limited compared to what a diverse gut requires to function optimally. Add 2 new plant species to your week, not 2 servings of something you already eat. 2 genuinely different plants. Do that for a month. Number 3. There is now enough direct research on the gut microbiomes of Japanese populations to move beyond inference and into documented biological differences, and the findings are striking enough that the global microbiome research community has spent significant effort trying to understand what is producing them. Studies comparing the gut microbiomes of Japanese adults to Western adult populations have found several consistent differences. Japanese gut microbiomes contain significantly higher populations of bifidobacterium species, which are among the most studied and most reliably beneficial bacterial groups, associated with healthy gut function, reduced inflammation, and effective immune regulation. They contain higher populations of Akkermansia mucinifila, a bacterial species associated with a healthy gut lining, and reduced intestinal permeability, the condition colloquially described as leaky gut. And they show higher overall diversity as measured by species richness, which is consistently associated with better metabolic health, more stable immune function, and lower rates of inflammatory disease. The research has also identified specific bacterial species and genetic adaptations in Japanese microbiomes that are either rare or absent in Western populations. One of the most striking findings is the prevalence of genes encoding enzymes specifically adapted to metabolizing seaweed polysaccharides found in gut bacteria of Japanese individuals but largely absent in Western individuals. These are not genetic differences between Japanese and Western people. They are microbiome differences, and they are the direct product of dietary environment. Feed a microbiome seaweed consistently across generations, and it adapts to extract maximal benefit from seaweed. Feed it primarily processed grain products, and the microbiome adapts accordingly. The Akkermansia mucinifila finding is worth spending a moment on because it connects directly to the gut problem that most Western people experience without understanding its biological basis. Akkermansia is the primary bacterial species responsible for maintaining the mucus layer that lines the gut wall. This mucus layer is the physical barrier that keeps gut contents separate from the bloodstream and prevents the systemic inflammation that results when those contents breach the barrier. Low Akkermansia populations mean a thinner, less effective mucus layer. A thinner mucus layer means more intestinal permeability. More permeability means more systemic inflammation. More systemic inflammation means more of the joint pain, skin issues, brain fog, and autoimmune conditions that have become increasingly prevalent in Western populations alongside the dietary changes that reduce Akkermansia populations. Japanese diets support Akkermansia populations through 2 primary mechanisms. First, the prebiotic fiber from diverse vegetables, and seaweed provides the food that Akkermansia preferentially eats. Second, the absence of the ultra-processed food and excess dietary sugar that have been specifically shown to suppress Akkermansia populations removes the primary environmental threat to that species in the gut. The Akkermansia finding extends beyond gut wall integrity. Higher populations are consistently found in metabolically healthier individuals across multiple studies linking this gut wall bacterium directly to metabolic outcomes most people would not initially connect to the microbiome. Here is the shift. Akkermansia cannot be taken as a supplement, or at least not reliably or affordably at the current state of the science. It is maintained by feeding it the right prebiotic inputs and removing the dietary factors that suppress it. High fiber, fermented food, low ultra-processed food, those are not supplement instructions. They are food instructions, and they are available at your next grocery shop. Number 4, this is the finding I promised, and it is the one that most fundamentally explains the difference between Japanese and Western gut health in a way that no amount of supplement consumption can address. Japan uses antibiotics at a rate significantly lower than most other wealthy nations. The reasons behind this are multiple and complex, involving medical culture, patient expectations, prescribing norms, and regulatory frameworks, but the gut health consequence is stark and well documented. Every course of antibiotics significantly damages the gut microbiome. Not slightly. Significantly. A single course of broad-spectrum antibiotics can reduce gut microbiome diversity by up to 30%, and research on recovery timelines consistently finds that full restoration of pre-antibiotic microbiome diversity takes months at minimum and often does not fully occur. Some bacterial species, once eliminated by antibiotics, do not return without deliberate reintroduction through sustained fermented food intake or very targeted probiotic intervention. In the West, antibiotic prescribing has been significantly higher than clinical necessity would justify across the past several decades. Antibiotics prescribed for viral infections where they are ineffective. Antibiotics prescribed preventively. Antibiotics consumed through the food supply via livestock that are raised with routine antibiotic use. The cumulative antibiotic exposure of the average Western adult represents a systematic, repeated assault on the gut microbiome that begins in childhood and continues through life, and the damage accumulates. Each course does not fully undo the last recovery. The microbiome becomes progressively less diverse with repeated antibiotic exposure even when fermented food and fiber intake are adequate. Japan's lower antibiotic use rate means that the microbiome that has been carefully built through a lifetime of fermented food and fiber diversity is not being repeatedly demolished and partially rebuilt. It is allowed to compound. The diversity established through decades of consistent dietary input accumulates rather than being periodically wiped back towards zero. The result is a microbiome that is not just better built, but better maintained, because the primary environmental threat to microbiome diversity in the modern world has been applied to it far less frequently. This is the finding that supplement strategies cannot address and that most gut health conversations avoid. If you have taken multiple courses of antibiotics across your life, and most Western adults have, your microbiome has been reset multiple times from partial scratch, and the recovery from each reset was incomplete. The gut health gap between Japan and the West is not primarily a fermented food gap. It is a fermented food gap compounded by an antibiotic exposure gap, and the antibiotic history is already written. What you can do going forward is build and maintain the microbiome as aggressively as possible through dietary means, knowing that you are working on a longer runway than someone who has not had the same antibiotic history. The food supply dimension compounds the prescription problem. Western livestock raised with routine antibiotic use introduces residue into the food supply at levels that represent a continuous low-level input entirely separate from any prescription course and largely invisible to the people receiving it. Here is the shift. You cannot undo past antibiotic exposure. You can decide that from this point forward, the microbiome you have gets the dietary environment it needs to rebuild and maintain diversity as effectively as possible. Daily fermented food, maximum plant diversity, minimum ultra-processed input. Those are not consolation prizes. They are the actual rebuilding program, and they are the program Japan has been running by default for centuries. Number 5. The integrity of the gut wall itself, the physical barrier between the digestive system and the rest of the body, is maintained more effectively by the Japanese dietary environment than by the Western one, and this matters more to daily gut function than most people realize. The gut wall is a single cell layer thick in the areas of highest function. This thin layer does enormous work. It selectively allows nutrients across into the bloodstream while keeping gut contents, bacteria, undigested food particles, and toxins on the other side. When this barrier is compromised, when the junctions between the cells become less tight and more permeable, materials that should stay in the gut cross into the bloodstream and trigger an immune response. That immune response produces systemic inflammation, which in the gut manifests as bloating, cramping, irregular function, and food sensitivities that seem to multiply over time. The Japanese diet maintains gut wall integrity through two complementary mechanisms. First, the butyrate production from diverse fermented fiber directly feeds the colonocytes, the cells that make up the gut wall. Colonocytes derive approximately 70% of their energy from butyrate produced by gut bacteria fermenting fiber. A diet with adequate fiber diversity produces adequate butyrate. Adequate butyrate keeps the colonocytes well fed and the tight junctions between them properly maintained. A low-fiber diet produces insufficient butyrate, colonocytes become energy deprived, and the tight junctions loosen. The gut becomes more permeable not because of any disease process, but because the cells maintaining the barrier are not receiving enough energy to maintain it at full integrity. Second, the absence of the ultra-processed food additives that specifically damage gut wall integrity. Emulsifiers, which are added to processed foods to keep ingredients combined, have been specifically shown in research to degrade the mucus layer protecting the gut wall and to disrupt the gut microbiome in ways that increase permeability. Carboxymethyl cellulose and polysorbate 80, two of the most commonly used food emulsifiers in Western processed foods, have demonstrated gut-damaging effects in animal models significant enough that the research prompted serious concern about their widespread use. These emulsifiers are essentially absent from traditional Japanese food because traditional Japanese food is not ultra-processed. There is nothing in a piece of salmon, a bowl of miso soup, or a serving of pickled daikon that requires an emulsifier to hold it together. Research published in Nature found that carboxymethyl cellulose, present in hundreds of common packaged products, promoted intestinal inflammation and altered gut microbiome composition in ways consistently associated with chronic inflammatory gut disease. Here is the shift. Your gut wall is only as intact as the food you are building it with. A diet that consistently underfuels the cells maintaining that wall and exposes them to compounds that actively damage it will produce a permeable gut, regardless of what supplements you take afterward. Remove the damaged inputs first, build the fiber foundation second. The barrier fixes itself when given the right conditions. Number 6. The traditional Japanese eating structure gives the gut something that Western eating patterns consistently deny it, which is genuine, extended rest between eating occasions during which the digestive system can complete its maintenance cycle. The migrating motor complex is the gut's housekeeping mechanism. During fasting periods of 90 minutes or more, it initiates a wave of muscular contractions that sweeps from the stomach through the small intestine, moving undigested debris, mucus, and accumulated bacteria from the small intestine into the large intestine. This prevents the accumulation of bacteria in the small intestine, where they do not belong in large numbers, and resets the digestive tract for the next meal. Western eating patterns interrupt this cycle constantly. Continuous grazing, the mid-morning snack, the afternoon nibble, the something before dinner, the something after dinner, the something before bed means the migrating motor complex rarely, if ever, completes a full cycle. The small intestine never gets swept clean. Bacteria accumulate. Small intestinal bacterial overgrowth, a condition that was once considered rare, has become increasingly recognized as a driver of many of the gut symptoms most Western people experience, and its prevalence correlates almost directly with the rise of continuous snacking culture. Traditional Japanese meal culture is built around 3 distinct meals with genuine non-eating periods between them. Not because of any deliberate health strategy, but because the meal culture was structured around communal mealtimes rather than individual continuous grazing. The gut gets swept clean multiple times per day, every day, automatically, because the eating pattern allows the conditions for it. This also allows the gastric acid and digestive enzymes produced for one meal to complete their work before being required to ramp up again for the next one. The enzyme systems of the stomach and pancreas operate most efficiently when they have time to reset between meals. Continuous eating requires continuous enzyme production, which strains the system and produces less efficient digestion of each individual meal than properly spaced eating with adequate recovery time in between. SIBO, small intestinal bacterial overgrowth, has become one of the most frequently diagnosed gut conditions in Western gastroenterology, and its prevalence tracks almost precisely with the rise of continuous snacking culture and the loss of fasting periods. Here is the shift. The structural solution to gut dysfunction is not more supplements. It is longer gaps between eating occasions. 4 hours minimum between meals. Nothing caloric between them. Allow the migrating motor complex to run. Allow the enzyme systems to reset. Allow the gut to do the maintenance it was designed to do during the fasting periods that continuous Western snacking culture has eliminated. Number 7. The supplement model of gut health fails not because supplements are fraudulent, but because they are applying a pharmaceutical logic to a systems problem, and systems problems do not respond to pharmaceutical solutions. A probiotic supplement introduces bacteria. Whether those bacteria survive transit through stomach acid, take up residence in the gut, and multiply depends entirely on the environment they arrive in. a gut that is consistently under-maintained through low fiber intake, high ultra-processed food exposure, elevated inflammation from a permeable gut wall, and insufficient mucus layer support from depleted Akkermansia populations is not a hospitable environment. Introducing bacteria into an inhospitable environment produces the same result as planting seeds in concrete. The Japanese approach to gut health is not an approach at all. It is not a strategy anybody designed. It is a food culture that happens to produce the environmental conditions in which a healthy, diverse, functional gut microbiome can establish itself and maintain itself across a lifetime. The fermented food delivers the bacteria. The diverse fiber feeds them. The absence of ultra-processed emulsifiers prevents the mucus layer from being degraded. The extended meal gaps allow the maintenance cycles to run. The conservative antibiotic use means the ecosystem is not periodically demolished. Each element creates the conditions for the next element to work. It is a system, and systems require all their parts to function. The supplement approach tries to address each part of the system separately and sequentially. Take a probiotic for the bacteria. Take a prebiotic supplement for the fiber. Take a gut lining repair supplement for the permeability. Take a digestive enzyme for the enzyme insufficiency. Each supplement is responding to a symptom of the broken system without addressing the system itself, and because the system itself is still broken, each symptomatic relief is temporary and requires ongoing supplementation to maintain. This is excellent for supplement companies. It is not effective for the people consuming the supplements. The Japanese gut health story is ultimately a story about what happens when the environment is right, when the right bacteria are delivered consistently, when they are fed the right diverse inputs every day, when the gut wall is maintained by adequate butyrate from adequate fiber, when the mucus layer is protected from the compounds that degrade it, when the maintenance cycles are allowed to run, when the ecosystem is not repeatedly demolished by excessive antibiotic use. In those conditions, the gut functions. In the conditions the Western diet creates, it does not, and no amount of supplementation fixes a broken environment from the inside. Restoration ecology establishes that you cannot rebuild a damaged ecosystem by introducing species into a still hostile environment. You repair the environment first. The gut microbiome follows the same principle exactly. Here is the shift. Stop supplementing the symptoms and start changing the environment. The environment is the food, the meal structure, and the decision about what not to eat. Fix the environment and the microbiome fixes itself. That is not optimism, it is ecology. 7 mechanisms, 1 system. Diverse fermented food at every meal, building and maintaining the microbial community. 40+ plant species per week, feeding every species in that community what it specifically needs. A microbiome measurably different in diversity and specific bacterial populations. Lower antibiotic exposure, allowing that microbiome to compound rather than being periodically reset. A gut wall kept intact by adequate butyrate from fiber and protected from the emulsifiers that degrade it. Genuine fasting periods between meals, allowing the maintenance cycles that keep the small intestine clean. And an overall food environment that creates the conditions for gut health rather than creating the conditions for gut dysfunction and then selling supplements to manage the symptoms. The gut reset is 5 changes, not 7, not a protocol. 5 specific changes that address the highest impact mechanisms simultaneously. First, add miso soup to breakfast every morning. Not a capsule. Real miso dissolved in warm water. This delivers fermented food before the rest of the day's eating begins. Second, eat at least 1 additional fermented food at lunch or dinner. A tablespoon of kimchi, sauerkraut, or tsukemono pickled vegetables. 1 serving, 1 meal, every day. Third, add 2 new plant species to your diet every week for the next 4 weeks. Not 2 more servings of vegetables you already eat. 2 genuinely new plants, new species, new fiber profiles feeding new bacterial populations. Fourth, enforce a 4-hour minimum between each meal. Nothing caloric in the gaps. Water only. Allow the migrating motor complex to run. Fifth, remove 1 ultra-processed food category from your regular shopping. 1 category entirely, not reduced, eliminated. Chips, crackers, flavored snack products, whatever category is most consistent in your weekly cart. The emulsifiers in that category are doing more damage to your gut wall than the probiotics you might be taking are repairing. 5 changes. No supplements required. No expensive protocols. The gut is a biological system that follows the same logic as every other biological system on the planet. Give it the right environment and it functions. Japan did not design that environment. It simply never stopped living in it, and the gut health that results is not a feature of genetics or medicine. It is a feature of a food culture that was never dismantled. I will see you in the next one.